Welcome to episode 2 of the Restoration Obscura Field Guide podcast. I'm your host and the creator of Restoration Obscura, John Bulmer. I'm a professional photographer, historian, and archivist, and these are the stories I'm passionate about because they interest me. I hope they interest you too. Restoration Obscura explores the forgotten, the hidden, and the overlooked corners of history through images, artifacts, and stories that time nearly erased. From lost infrastructure to recovered photographs, each episode is a journey into the past, told through the lens of research, restoration, and rediscovery. Thank you for listening. I'm really glad you're here. Let's talk about a story that's lingered in the sky for over 40 years. Not a ghost story, not a tall tale, but something far stranger and a lot harder to dismiss. They called it The Thing. That's what stuck. Not a flying saucer, not little green men, just a thing. Enormous, silent, and slow, triangular mostly. Sometimes shaped like a boomerang. Witnesses would say it was covered in lights, red, white, sometimes even blue, that blinked and measured deliberate patterns, not chaotic, not random, like they were trying to say something. And the strangest detail of all, it didn't make a sound. Not a word, not a rumble, not even a whisper of wind, just quiet. This wasn't a one-time event. It wasn't just one weird night and a few people seeing lights. This started back in 1981 and stretched across the rest of the decade, nearly 10 years. And during that time, the Hudson Valley became the stage for one of the most consistently documented waves of UFO sightings in American history. Over 5,000 reports. That's not a typo. More than 5,000. Picture that. It's not just a few people on back roads. These were families, commuters, off-duty cops, IBM engineers, airline pilots, people with everything to lose and nothing to gain by going public. And still, they reported it. They saw a craft that dwarfed football fields, gliding, hovering, sometimes creeping so slowly it barely looked like it was moving at all. Other times, they said it followed cars, keeping pace like it was watching. And sometimes it just stopped in the sky and sat there as if it were thinking. These towns weren't remote wilderness. This was commuter country. These were neighborhoods with swing sets and streetlights, with driveways and diners, places where people knew what airplanes looked like, because many of them built them. One of the most well-documented nights was March 24th, 1983. That evening, police departments across the region were flooded with calls. Over 300 people picked up their phones and said some version of the same thing. There's something in the sky and we don't know what it is. Officer Andy Sadoff from Carmel, New York, was one of them. She later told a reporter, "It was massive. It just hovered there, not making a sound. I don't know what we were looking at, but it wasn't any kind of aircraft I've ever seen." Ralph Lalone, speaking to the New York Times, described how drivers pulled over along the Taconic Parkway and just stood there, silent, looking up. No one spoke, he said. It was like it had stunned everyone. Another account came from a woman named Debbie Tomasic in Yorktown Heights. She said it was shaped like a boomerang with lights all around it, or it was so big it blocked out the stars. And this wasn't one isolated hotspot. The same object, if it was the same object, was seen from Brewster, Mahopac, Fishkill, Kent, New Paltz, and beyond. Even parts of Connecticut and western Massachusetts got in on it. A man in South Kent, Connecticut, reported a glowing craft hovering above his field, and he said it gave off a deep hum, not exactly a noise, but something he felt in his bones. Meanwhile, a family in Yorktown said they saw a V-shaped craft float silently over their house, low enough that they felt like it was watching them. Eventually, the calls came in so fast that some local departments just stopped writing them down. They couldn't keep up. One dispatcher reportedly told a colleague, "It's just another one. Let it go." So what was going on? A few theories emerged. One of the most common was that a group of local pilots were flying ultralight aircraft in formation, using bright lights to play a prank. Some sightings could line up with that, but that theory falls apart when you consider the size, the silence, and how long the sightings lasted. other suspected military experiments. Stewart Air Force Base isn't far, and West Point sits right in the corridor of many of the reports. Could it have been classified tech being tested? Maybe, but no one's ever confirmed that. And then there was Whitley Strieber. In 1987, Strieber, a novelist who lived in the Hudson Valley, released his book Communion. It was a personal account of what he believed were abduction experiences, and it hit a nerve. The book featured that now iconic image of a gray alien with huge black eyes. It wasn't presented as proof, but it changed the conversation. Suddenly, these weren't just lights in the sky, they were encounters. By the late 80s, the sightings had become something of a phenomenon. In Pine Bush, New York, people started gathering nightly to skywatch. West Searsville Road turned into an impromptu observation post. Folks brought lawn chairs and cameras. They'd sit for hours just hoping to catch a glimpse. Researcher Ellen Crystal spent years documenting the area. In her book, Silent Invasion, she recorded stories of lights moving in strange patterns, people feeling a strange presence even when nothing appeared. One skywatcher told her, "It felt like the cosmos was cracking open. Even when nothing appeared, we stayed. We needed to be there." Today, Pine Bush embraces its reputation. There's a UFO fair, vendors, speakers, skywatches. The sightings may have slowed down, but the story lives on. And what do we make of it all? Was it experimental aircraft, a coordinated hoax, something we still don't have a word for? I can't say for sure, but I can tell you this. The consistency of those reports, the credibility of the witnesses, and the sheer volume of sightings make this more than a curiosity. It's history, and it's not alone. We've seen waves like this before. Go back to 1952, Washington, D.C. Radar operators at National Airport tracked multiple unidentified objects in restricted airspace over the Capitol. Fighter jets were scrambled, but the objects vanished. The Air Force called it temperature inversions, but even their own pilots doubted that explanation. In 1965, Kecksburg, Pennsylvania saw something fall from the sky. Witnesses described a metallic acorn-shaped object crashing into the woods. The military quickly sealed off the area. Nothing was officially recovered. The press dubbed it Pennsylvania's Roswell. In 1976, over Tehran, Iran, 2 F-4 Phantom jets were scrambled to intercept a glowing object seen hovering over the city. As they approached, their instruments failed. Communications dropped. When they retreated, their systems returned. The pilots' accounts were detailed and backed by radar logs. And in 1980, just 3 years before that huge night in the Hudson Valley, there was the Rendlesham Forest incident in England. U.S. Air Force personnel stationed at RAF Woodbridge reported seeing lights in the forest. Some claimed a metallic craft landed. One officer even wrote a memo describing it. Official channels gave conflicting explanations, including a lighthouse. Even more recently, in 1997, Phoenix, Arizona lit up with what would become known as the Phoenix Lights. Thousands of residents reported a massive triangular object flying silently overhead. Some said it stretched a mile long. It was seen by people across the state. Still, the governor at the time mocked the incident until years later when he admitted he'd seen it too. All of these cases share something in common: a large number of credible witnesses, a consistent pattern of strange aerial behavior, and no definitive answers. And here's where it gets more personal, because the impact of events like these doesn't end with the sightings. Some people never looked at the night sky the same way again. I've spoken with locals who still get chills talking about it. One man, now in his 70s, told me that as a kid, he was in the back seat of his parents' car when they pulled over near Brewster. And he remembers his father getting out and staring upward for a long time, then saying quietly, "That's not right." And for years after, that silence, his father's awe, maybe even fear, stuck with him more than the lights themselves. Therapists in the region quietly began hearing from patients experiencing anxiety, recurring dreams, and night terrors. A few local police officers admitted they stopped responding to calls if the caller mentioned anything in the sky. There was something about the Hudson Valley wave that got under people's skin. The media played a strange role too. At first, reporters chased the story. Then the ridicule started. Editorial cartoons, late night jokes. Even when people had seen something extraordinary, they felt pressure to shut up about it, to laugh it off, to pretend it hadn't happened. Some didn't. They became researchers, as sky watchers, and archivists. And some of those people have kept this story alive. It's only in recent years that government disclosures have given this topic a little bit of its credibility back. The Department of Defense has quietly admitted they've been tracking UAPs, unidentified anomalous phenomena. Reports have been sent to Congress. One declassified Navy video shows a fast-moving object flipping end over end and disappearing into the ocean. Pilots and intelligence officials have gone on the record to say, essentially, yes, we see things, and no, we don't know what they are. That doesn't mean aliens, but it does mean that the lights in the sky seen in Washington, Kecksburg, Tehran, Rendlesham, Phoenix, and the Hudson Valley were real to someone. They were seen, they were recorded, they were feared, and they were remembered. The Hudson Valley has always been a layered place. Native trails, revolutionary battlefields, Cold War bunkers, IBM labs. Maybe the skies are just another layer. Maybe some stories aren't meant to be solved. Maybe they're meant to be remembered, and maybe we need them. Because underneath all the reports, the lights, the grainy videos, and the official documents is something more human, a longing, a question, a kind of awe that keeps us looking up. We tell these stories not just to record what happened, but to connect with something bigger than ourselves. We pass them down because they point to the unknown, because they ask us to sit with mystery and to live in a world that's not yet finished being explained. In every generation, people have looked to the skies and seen more than clouds. They've seen meaning. Sometimes it's divine, sometimes it's terrifying, sometimes it's just a spark of wonder, but it's always there. That need to ask, what else is out there? Are we alone? Have we already been seen? And maybe most of all, what does it mean that we keep asking these questions? The philosopher Carl Jung once wrote that UFOs were the modern equivalent of angels. Not because he believed in alien visitation, but because he understood our need to project meaning upward, into the sky, into the cosmos, into something beyond us. Today, that projection takes the shape of UAPs, unidentified anomalous phenomena. And unlike past decades, this time the government isn't entirely dismissing it. In 2020, the Pentagon quietly formed a task force under the Department of Defense to track and evaluate UAPs. In 2021, a report delivered to Congress listed 144 incidents investigated by military pilots and intelligence agencies. Of those, only one could be explained as a deflated weather balloon. The rest? Unknown. And that was just the beginning. In 2022, the Pentagon established the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, AARO. Its mission? To standardize reporting and analysis of unexplained phenomena across the air, sea, and space domains. AARO now maintains a public-facing website that acknowledges UAP encounters. It doesn't confirm alien contact, but it does confirm that the government is paying attention. In hearings before Congress, Navy pilots have testified that UAPs routinely violate restricted airspace. They describe craft that outmaneuver the most advanced jets, that hover silently, that accelerate instantly, and the message repeated over and over is simple. We don't know what these are. That's not science fiction. That's in the congressional record. So maybe these stories matter more now than ever. Not because they give us answers, but because they give us permission to wonder, to ask questions, to remember that mystery still exists in our world. And if you've ever looked up at the sky and felt small or curious or like the stars might be watching back, you're not alone. You're part of a story that's older than radar, older than weather balloons, a story written in the dark and still unfolding. That's why I'll keep telling these stories and listening for the ones you send me. Because maybe, just maybe, it's not about solving the mystery. Maybe it's about keeping it alive. What's left is the silence, the awe, and that thing in the sky that never made a sound. But before the Hudson Valley wave, before Pine Bush, and the Taconic Parkway sightings, we need to look back, way back. Because these kinds of sightings, this kind of phenomenon, it didn't start in the 80s. You could argue it began in 1947. That's when a man named Kenneth Arnold, a private pilot flying near Mount Rainier, Washington, reported seeing 9 strange craft flying in formation. He described them as moving like a saucer skipping across water. The press ran with it, and the term flying saucer was born. Just weeks later, something crash landed near Roswell, New Mexico. The Army Air Force initially said it had recovered a flying disc, then retracted that, claiming it was a weather balloon. That moment, whatever actually happened, lit the match. It became America's first mass UFO incident. From there, sightings exploded, not just in the desert, but all over the country. Some were likely misidentified aircraft, others might have been atmospheric phenomena. But a portion, the strange portion, never went away. And here's something important. These sightings often happen in waves, clusters. They flare up and then they quiet down. The 1950s saw a wave across the Midwest. The 60s had incident after incident from the Great Lakes to the Northeast. The 70s brought reports from logging camps in the Pacific Northwest, rural towns in Maine, and even police officers in New Hampshire. That clustering is something researchers have wrestled with. Why here? Why now? And why does it often coincide with times of high tension, socially, politically, or militarily? Enter the Cold War. In the 1950s through the 1980s, America was a nation on edge. Spy planes, missile tests, civil defense drills in school basements. The government was experimenting with aircraft that civilians weren't meant to see. And at places like Area 51, new technologies were being tested that no one would talk about for decades. And sometimes when people saw strange things in the sky, the military was watching too. Now about New York specifically, beyond the Hudson Valley, the state has its share of hotspots. And one is Montauk at the far end of Long Island, the site of a decommissioned Air Force radar station. It became the center of wild rumors in the 80s and 90s. Claims of mind control experiments, interdimensional rifts, and more. While much of that veers into urban legend, the area has long drawn attention from skywatchers. Another is Plattsburgh. Up near the Canadian border, Plattsburgh Air Force Base operated through the Cold War and beyond. Local residents reported odd lights in the skies over Lake Champlain and the surrounding mountains for years. Some even believed there was a connection to the so-called Champ, the lake monster said to live in the depths of Champlain. Massachusetts had its own flare-up in the 1960s and 70s. In the Berkshires, multiple families, including children, reported seeing craft, losing time, or experiencing unexplainable encounters. The Great Barrington Incident, as it's now known, is one of the most widely shared and hotly debated. On the night of September 1st, 1969, witnesses across Berkshire County, including in Great Barrington and Sheffield, reported strange lights in the sky and unsettling encounters. One of the central figures, Thomas Reed, claimed he and his family experienced a close encounter that night involving a beam of light, a shift in location, and what he described as an interior space with tall, non-human beings. Reed and others recalled missing time, odd sensations, and a sense that something deeply unusual had occurred. Decades later, the story found new life when it was featured in the Netflix reboot of Unsolved Mysteries, prompting more residents to come forward with memories from that night. Though skeptics raised eyebrows, the community response led to the installation of a memorial plaque recognizing the event near the site of the alleged encounter. This wasn't a fringe incident. It involved families, radio DJs, police officers, and people from different towns who didn't know each other. Yet their descriptions were eerily similar. And the sightings haven't stopped. In recent years, New Jersey has become the stage for a new wave of strange aerial encounters. Beginning in late 2023 and continuing into 2024, residents across northern New Jersey, including Bergen, Sussex, and Passaic counties, began reporting clusters of lights moving in tight triangular formations overhead. Videos flooded social media, clusters of glowing orbs in perfect V-shapes gliding over rooftops. Some hung motionless, others made sharp turns. Most moved without sound. Local officials were quick to respond. Many of the sightings, they explained, were likely consumer drones, some flown by enthusiasts, others by local police or fire departments testing night operations. Drone swarms are more common than ever, and they've introduced new complexity to the world of aerial phenomena. Consumer-grade drones today, are capable of synchronized flight patterns, silent operation, and extended airtime. In many cases, they can convincingly imitate the kinds of movements once considered unexplainable. They've filled the sky with noise, both literal and metaphorical, but the drone explanation has limits. It can't account for decades of earlier sightings. It doesn't explain what was seen before drones existed, and it doesn't explain the emotional resonance of those who've experienced something profoundly unknown. After I published my first article on the Hudson Valley sightings for Restoration Obscura, I was floored by the response. Close to 30 people reached out. Some said they had been holding on to their experiences for decades. They weren't looking for fame. They weren't trying to go viral. They just wanted to be heard. One man wrote, I've never told anyone outside my family, but when I read your piece, it brought everything back. I saw it. My dad saw it. We talked about it once and then never again. Others describe details I've heard again and again: the boomerang shape, the slow glide, the way it moved like it was studying the ground below. A woman in Dutchess County remembered it hovering over a tree line while she and her brother stared in stunned silence. A retired corrections officer said he'd seen it above the reservoir near Carmel and had spent years wondering if anyone else had. These accounts remind us that the past is alive, not just in records or ruins, but in memory, in what people carry quietly for a lifetime. These stories often start the same way: an ordinary night, then something unusual in the sky, and afterward, a moment you carry for the rest of your life. It reminded me why we tell these stories: not to prove, not to debunk, but to witness, to preserve what we felt, what we wondered, what we feared, and maybe even what we hoped. Because whether you believe it was aliens, secret tech, or something else entirely, this much is true. Thousands of people saw something, and those people are part of the historical record now. When I think about these stories, when I stand outside at night in the Hudson Valley and look up, I'm reminded that history isn't just what's written down. It's what's whispered, what's half remembered, what's passed between generations. I've been photographing the night sky for over 20 years, and the more time I spend under it, the more I realize it's not as quiet as we think. When people picture astrophotography, they imagine something pure, a clean image. Galaxies sharp as pins, stars like scattered frost, the Milky Way rising over some ridgeline untouched. That's the version you frame. That's the one you chase. But what we don't usually talk about is the clutter, the streaks, the noise. Because the night sky, our sky, is crowded. It's full of motion, full of us. We've launched over 16,000 satellites since the space age began. Around 8,300 of them are still active, and they're joined by more than 36,000 tracked pieces of space debris. Leftovers from launches, collisions, and old hardware. Zoom into pieces smaller than a softball, and you're into the millions. Add to that the 5,000 commercial aircraft over U.S. airspace at any one time, and 865,000 plus registered drones buzzing around just this country, and you get a sky that's more engineered than ever before. But here's the strange thing. This isn't the first time people looked up and saw things they didn't understand. Long before spaceflight, before drones, even before electricity, people have always watched the sky and tried to make sense of what they saw. And they recorded it, sometimes in stories, sometimes in stone. Here in New York State, what we now call the Empire State, the original watchers of the skies were the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Iroquois people, and their neighbors, like the Algonquin-speaking Mohican and Lenape. They lived under dark skies, free of light pollution, in a world where stars truly ruled the night. They didn't just observe the sky, they wove it into their lives. To the Haudenosaunee, constellations weren't just pinpoints of light, they were part of the story. One of the most well-known is the Great Bear, now recognized as part of what we call Ursa Major. Their legend tells of hunters chasing the Great Bear across the sky, the seasons marked by the arc of its celestial path. As the bear is killed each fall, The red blood stains the autumn leaves. When the bear rises again in spring, the cycle renews. Farther east, Lenape sky stories included spirits that danced in the aurora, interpreted as ancestors or omens, depending on the movement and color. These weren't idle tales. They were oral maps, calendars, warnings, prophecies. Even stone bears witness. Near Hoosick in Rensselaer County, an ancient granite bench aligned to the solstice still sits hidden in the forest. No one's entirely sure who placed it there or when, but it marks the sun's arc with uncanny precision. In other parts of the state, petroglyphs and stone alignments suggest solstice tracking and star mapping, evidence of skywatching cultures we're only beginning to understand. Some of these markings predate European arrival. Some may predate the modern tribes themselves. All of them prove the same thing. We've always looked up, and we've always told stories about what we saw. That's something I think about a lot, especially now, because in my line of work, the sky isn't just a canvas, it's a record, one that's always changing. Drones blink where stars used to be. Satellites sweep in rows. Starlink crawls in eerie formations. We try to edit them out to restore that pure image, but sometimes I leave them in because they're real, because they're part of the story now. Just like those ancient stories of bears and spirit lights and sky dancers, the trails of light we leave today, satellites, space junk, surveillance gear, they're records of us. But here's the catch. Not everything up there makes sense. Even now, with all our tools, all our technology, people still see things they can't explain. And not just fringe theorists or late-night radio callers. I've heard it from pilots, police officers, engineers. I've been documenting the area for years, and people have told me stories. On Parker Hill, near the Tom Hannock Reservoir, back in the 90s, locals said they saw lights moving over the dark water, cutting impossible lines at impossible speeds. It was long before smartphones. No one was recording, just watching. That feeling stuck with me, still does it. It's part of why I keep looking up, not just to photograph what's there, but to capture what's changing, because the sky isn't empty. It's full of motion, full of stories, full of questions. It's been that way for thousands of years, from the bear that rises in spring to the blinking lights we now follow with tracking apps. And maybe the sky is telling us something, not just about who we were, but about who we're becoming, because we're changing it, filling it with our own machinery, our own reflection. But in doing so, we're also at risk of losing something deeper, the darkness, the mystery, the quiet, the curiosity. And if we lose that, we don't just lose the stars, we lose the story. And that would be a shame. You can subscribe to Restoration Obscura at www.restorationobscura.com. This podcast is copyright 2025 John Bulmer Media and Restoration Obscura. All rights reserved, no reuse, rebroadcast, or repurposing of any content without express written permission. Thanks for listening. I'm John Bulmer, and remember, every photo has a story. Until next time.